Andy Warhol invented the concept of being an influencer or being famous for being famous, although Andy Warhol called it being a superstar. When Andy Warhol started making his underground movies in the 1960s, he was doing things way differently than anybody had ever done them before when it came to movie making. First of all, he was using real people. And he didn't have a set. He didn't have costumes. He didn't have a script you could memorize. He didn't even move the camera. He didn't direct. He just turned the camera on, and you were expected to perform. Do something interesting. Be outrageous. And whatever happened in front of the camera, that was the movie. And Andy did nothing to alter it. Andy embodied the gaze of a sadistic voyeur. No matter what the superstar did on camera, Andy would not really react. Maybe he would give a, "Oh wow," or "Really?" or But you really never knew what Andy was actually thinking. He was empty. He was an endless void, a black hole that could never be filled. But that did not stop superstars from trying. The more that Andy would not give a reaction, the more they would desperately try to get one out of him. So they would do crazier stuff, be more outrageous, raise the bar, raise the bar, raise the bar. And Andy would give them nothing. Andy understood a really important thing about being a star, and that is that the fall is just as important as the rise. You can't have a rise without a fall. As Ondine put it, divinity, star, what's the next category? What comes after star? Has been. So today we are going to talk about stars, we are going to talk about superstars, and ultimately we are going to talk about kind of the most superstar there ever was, Miss Edie Sedgwick. But before we get into all of that, hello, my name is Kate, and I am the creator of this YouTube channel and also the creator of The Factory, which is an immersive show about the world of Andy Warhol and the events that led to his attempted assassination by Valerie Solanas. In The Factory, you are invited to a party at Andy Warhol's famous art studio where you can help sit for your own screen test, you can help film an underground movie, help silkscreen paintings, rock out with the live rock band, and maybe be named Andy Warhol's next superstar. It is a wild show. I have been talking about it here on the internet for a while. I am currently fundraising and seeking commercial funding to bring this show into the real world, so there's links in the description if you would like to learn more about that. But today, we're going to get into part 3 of the Andy Warhol story. So if you've been following along, part 1 covered Andy's early life and childhood. Part 2 covered Andy moving to New York, being a commercial artist and trying to break into the fine art world. And now we are at part 3. The factory has opened, but it really hasn't become peak factory yet. But this is the video where we are getting into the factory of it all, the silver factory. It's time. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. Oh, I also forgot. I had this idea the other day that it would be really fun to do a live stream of Factory Girl. Factory Girl is a kind of notoriously terrible movie about Edie Sedgwick. It came out in 2006 or 2007. Has Sienna Miller as Edie Sedgwick. It has Jimmy Fallon as Chuck Wine, I think. I've seen this movie once in 2007. It's been a very long time. I don't really remember it, but I thought it would be fun to do a live stream watch party so that we could watch the film together and chat about it, and I can give my insights and we can just have a good time. So if you're interested in doing a Factory Girl watch party live stream thing, comment below and I will try and figure out a time that works for most people. The other thing is, please subscribe. It helps the channel. I do a lot of Warhol content. I also do New York history, punk rock history, art history kind of stuff. So subscribe if you are into that. And now, without further ado, let's talk about the year 1965 at the factory, because this is the year everything changed. So hello, we're back. It's time. I apologize, this video was late. I know, I'm so sorry. I was very ambitious thinking I could get a video out every weekend this month. It didn't totally happen, but I'm trying. I'm doing my best. And I'm very excited about this video. So today we are talking mostly about the year 1965, because this is the year that everything happened for Andy Warhol and the factory and all the superstars. Like, this is, when we think about the factory, I think we really think collectively about 1965, because this is really the year that it all came together. I also have to apologize. It's summer and I live in Brooklyn, and that means that it's loud here all the time. It's like mid-afternoon and somebody is lighting fireworks outside of my apartment, so I apologize if you hear motorcycles and loud noises and people yelling and all of that. So, to recap, we have hit the soup cans. We've had the Marilyn Monroe paintings. The JFK assassination has happened. The mole people, the homeless drug addicts that are obsessed with opera and amphetamines, they have moved into the factory and they're hanging out there 24 hours a day, basically. Billy Name has moved into the factory as the handyman. Gerard is at the factory as Andy's silkscreen assistant. And Ondine is the reigning superstar. Ondine is like king mole person. He's the one that's really obsessed with opera. He's in charge. But things are about to change. Oh, also, before we get into this whole video, I do want to pause right here and say that I want to give a little bit of a trigger warning for this video. There is going to be discussions of childhood sexual abuse and eating disorders and drug abuse. So those are sensitive topics for you. I totally understand. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next video. So that being said, let's dive into 1965, because, oh boy, it's time. So when the factory first opened, Andy Warhol was very, very heavily influenced by the underground film scene that was happening in New York, particularly the filmmaker Jack Smith. Jack Smith was the man who created the film Flaming Creatures, starring Taylor Mead, that was kind of like the precursor to the factory films. And we talked about this in part 2, so if you want to learn more about that, I would head over there. But the critical thing that Andy learned from Jack Smith was that you could use real people in your films. He kind of stole that idea from Jack. And the stars that were in these underground films were starting to become kind of famous within the world of like underground art in New York. And so it wasn't just like being called a star, they actually were kind of becoming stars for real. And that also was very interesting to Andy. So in 1964, Andy was already experimenting with using real people in his underground films, but in 1965, things started changing. The camera was rolling a little bit differently. The scripts got shorter. The performances got stranger. And Andy got quieter. In January 1965, a man named Ronald Tavel starts hanging around the factory. And Ronald Tavel was a playwright. And so Andy and Ron start working together to create short scripts for Andy's underground movies. And the scripts had to be very simple. One, because Andy Warhol did not move the camera, so all the action had to take place in one location. So it could not be complex. And then the other thing was that the superstars really did not like to learn lines. So you couldn't give them too much dialogue because they weren't going to memorize it anyways. So Ron is like doing his best to create scripts for Andy Warhol's films, and he has a lot working against him, but he's trying very hard. And so At this time, Andy had started doing this series called The 13 Most Beautiful Girls and the 13 Most Beautiful Boys. And basically, this was a moving portrait. So Andy would see somebody and he'd be like, oh, you're so beautiful. You should be one of my 13 most beautiful boys. And they would sit the person down in front of the camera and film basically like a moving headshot or a moving portrait. They would be lit like very dramatically from one side, and then they would be filmed in slightly slow motion. So it gave the like very dramatic, romantic kind of quality to the film. And so they had been doing this series, and there were way more than 13 beautiful girls and 13 beautiful boys, but this was kind of what it was called. And so they start filming the series, and then Andy has the idea that he wants to film a movie where he gets a real reaction out of somebody. Kind of like a reaction video that we would watch now. He was very interested in realness. And so he tells Ron to write a script where they can get a real reaction out of somebody. And so they ask this man named Philip Fagan, who was Andy's boyfriend at the time, and they ask Philip to be in this film, and he agrees. And so Philip is framed in the camera, and then Ron is just off camera, and he asks a series of very pointed personal questions at Philip, and the intention is to like catch Philip off guard, provoke him, just get a real reaction. And so Ron does his best, but Philip is like very proud and really resists giving a reaction. Like he does not want to embarrass himself. And so the more that Ron asks these questions, the more that Philip like holds back. And Andy is standing behind Ron, and Ron can tell that Andy is like very not happy with what's going on. And Ron gets so stressed, and they watch the film back, and it's terrible. And Ron is like, oh my God, Andy hates me. I didn't do it right. This is terrible. And so they decide to do it again. But this time, they ask Mario Montez to be in the film instead of Philip Fagan. And Mario had already been in a number of Warhol films and was very much like a superstar. And so Mario was all too happy to be asked personal revealing questions. And this time, Ron was not going to mess this up. And so they start to film the second film, and Ron starts asking Mario very aggressive, very personal, pointed questions. And he is relentless. He's basically torturing Mario. And Andy is loving this. And so when the session is over, they watch it back, and Andy's thrilled. He got exactly what he wanted. But Ron is kind of appalled at what's happened. And he realizes that the questions that he asked Mario actually reveal way more about himself than they could ever reveal about Mario. Because these questions, these dark, sadistic questions, came from him. He was the one that decided to ask these things. So it's very revealing for Ron, and it really makes him think about what he's doing. But like I said, Andy loves it. And this style of filmmaking, of having somebody off camera asking very personal, pointed questions at a star to get a reaction, becomes the way that they film all of the movies at the factory kind of from here on out. Not exactly. I guess there are some movies where this was not the case, but Andy really likes this approach. So the first film with Philip Fagan and the second film with Mario Montez become known as Screen Test Number 1 and Screen Test Number 2. And from here on out, all of the moving portraits that they were doing for the 13 Most Beautiful Boys and Girls series, all of these portraits become known as screen tests. And it becomes this initiation point at the factory. Whenever a new person comes into the circle, the first thing they need to do is sit for a screen test. And it kind of determines whether or not you are accepted into the factory. If you can sit in front of a camera and do something, it kind of proves to Andy that you're worth keeping around. If you sit in front of the camera and you're boring, you're out. You're not a superstar. That is how they start to determine, really, who belongs at the factory and who doesn't. And even though, at this point, Andy has kind of already tested his theory that anyone can be a star. He's made the art collector Ethel's skull into a star in his famous painting Ethel's Skull 32 times. And he's also made like the Campbell's soup cans and Heinz stars because he understands the importance of branding, and he's put them in his paintings. And so on the one hand, Andy has this theory that like we're all stars, anybody can be a star. But on the other hand, he also kind of knows that there is this undefinable quality that makes somebody a superstar. It's the it factor. And there are two people that are about to show up at the factory that definitely have the it factor. So as I said, it's time for Edie Sedgwick. This video, I'm going to take kind of a blended timeline approach. So I'm going to go back and forth in time a little bit. I will really do my best to make this not chaotic and not confusing. But we're going to jump back a little bit so I can give you some background into Edie Sedgwick. If you would like to learn more, I do have an Edie Sedgwick video that I really dive into everything, but I want to give you a little bit of background in case you don't know for this video. So Edie Sedgwick was born April 20th, 1943, and she is the seventh and youngest child of Alice and Francis Fuzzy Sedgwick. The Sedgwicks were like a very, very old school, wealthy family that went back generations, like basically the dawn of America. Like they were founding fathers practically. I mean, not literally, but they were a very old school, aristocratic, American, wealthy family. But despite the family's wealth and status, Edie, and kind of because of their wealth and status, really, Edie has a very troubled childhood. So her family moved from the East Coast to this sprawling ranch in California, and Edie is raised in very, very isolated. Only ever spends time with her immediate family, and she's like essentially homeschooled, and not just homeschooled, but like kind of taught in this bizarre upper class wealthy way that her family is like better than everybody else's, and that they are special and they are more important. And so she kind of views her parents as like these godlike figures, and they ride horses and they have this big ranch, and she is kind of this like wild child that is not really socialized like a normal person, but then also told that she is like better than everyone and very important, and like the Sedgwicks are the best people ever. So it's very like bizarre messaging that Edie gets. And then to throw another wrench on top of that, Fuzzy Sedgwick, Edie's father, was abusive. Like there's no really nice way to put this. He was narcissistic, he was controlling, he was erratic, chaotic. I'm sure had some sort of kind of personality disorder that I am not qualified to diagnose, but an unstable man, for sure. He also openly carried on like tons of affairs in front of the kids and everybody. Like he just was not hiding anything. In fact, one of the most traumatic moments of Edie's early life was that when she was like 11 or 12, around that age, she walked in on her father, Fuzzy, sleeping with one of his mistresses. And when Fuzzy saw Edie, he slapped her across the face and told her that she was crazy and that she was seeing things. And that very night, they called a doctor to the house to like tranquilize her. So she sees these traumatic images. She sees her father sleeping with his mistress, and then immediately after that is told that she's insane, and a doctor comes and administers tranquilizers. And Edie also has said that her father began making passes at her, is the way that she phrased it, but being sexually abusive starting around when she was like 7 years old. So Edie, not a great start in life, unfortunately for Edie, or any of the Sedgwick children. She was not the only person that was abused. She was one of 7 children. So This, I'm sure, was happening to some degree or another to all of the kids in the Sedgwick family. But after the tranquilizer incident, Edie starts to develop symptoms of an eating disorder. And this was like the 1950s, so eating disorders were really not discussed, or even most people were not aware of what they were or what caused them or anything like that. So she was suffering, but she was not really being treated for the eating disorder or any of her mental issues at this point. In 1958, Edie is enrolled at St. Timothy's, which is a very exclusive all-girls boarding school, and it's in Maryland. And when Edie first gets there, she is like the talk of the town. She's the most popular girl in school because Edie can be very charming, and she tells all the girls at the school these fabulous stories about life on the Sedgwick Ranch and her wealthy, beautiful parents and riding horses and painting and all the things that she does as a Sedgwick. And the girls at St. Timothy's are all about Edie, and she starts to kind of like roil the fabric of like the social scene at St. Timothy's, and she becomes like the head bitch in charge. Becomes like these warring factions between girls, and she demands displays of loyalty, and she causes all of this like interpersonal drama. It's like very, very dramatic. And then by like winter of the school year, it all starts to fall apart, and she loses control, and she's having like emotional outbursts in class, and she's picking at her skin and her nails, and she's not eating, and she's clearly mentally unwell. And so after that year at St. Timothy's, she is not able to return. So that's kind of what's happening with Edie's childhood. At the same time, in like the late 40s, 50s, we have the other superstar that is about to hit the scene. And that, of course, is Mr. Lewis Allen Reed. Lou Reed was born in Brooklyn and grew up in Freeport, New York. And Lou's childhood was very different from Edie's. Lou is from a working class background in New York, and his parents are fairly conservative people. And when Lou was about 17 years old in 1959, he starts having like a mental breakdown, and he has anxiety, he's having panic attacks. His parents do want to help him, but they don't know what to do. And Lou says that he's having homosexual urges, which is very shocking to his parents. And because they're at a loss as to how to help Lou, they go to a doctor, and the doctor recommends electroshock therapy. So Lou's parents arranged for him to receive electroshock therapy at the encouragement of a psychotherapist. And in these non-consensual sessions, Lou is strapped to a table with the tube inserted down his throat to prevent choking, and he is then sedated and administered 24 electric shocks to the head. And Lou receives these treatments at Creedmoor State Psychiatric Hospital in Queens over a period of 8 weeks. And these treatments were meant to treat his homosexual urges, but of course, that is not how any of this works. And so getting his brain shocked with electricity, shockingly, does not make him not gay. Nonetheless, Lou was extremely traumatized by this experience, and it really affected him for the rest of his life, but especially directly after this period. He became very angry, very distrustful of his parents, distrustful of authority, and just very angry as a person. He actually experienced memory loss and symptoms of PTSD for the rest of his life because of this electroshock therapy. But by 1960, Lou has recovered more or less-ish from his mental health struggles, and he enrolls at Syracuse University, where he studies journalism and creative writing. Although I do need to say, he was in ROTC, not what I expected, but he was a platoon leader in ROTC, but then he was asked to leave because he held a gun up to his supervisor's head. So he was already exhibiting kind of like antisocial behavior. the timelines are going to blend back together. So, in the fall of 1962, when Andy is already in New York doing his thing, trying to break into the fine art world, Edie, who is 19 years old, is displaying increasingly manic behavior and signs of an undiagnosed eating disorder. And her parents are kind of at a loss, and so they put her into a psychiatric facility in Connecticut. Then, a couple years later, March 4th, 1964, Edie's closest sibling, Minty, commits suicide by hanging himself. And this is devastating to Edie, and it happens the day before Minty's 26th birthday. And then, just a few weeks after Minty has killed himself, Edie comes into a trust that was set up by her grandmother, and it dispenses $10,000 a month, which is like crazy money. I feel like $10,000 a month in 2025 is still like a lot of money. $10,000 a month in 1964 is crazy money. So Edie, who has not graduated from school, she decides that Cambridge University is not that exciting, and she wants to move to New York because now she has $10,000 a month and she can do whatever she wants. So Edie and her good friend Chuck Wine decide to leave Cambridge and move to New York City. Then, just a few weeks later, in June of 1964, Lou Reed graduates from Syracuse University, and he gets a job at a company called Pickwick International, which is a record company, and Lou gets a job basically writing prefab songs. So he would write these songs, and then session musicians would play them, they would record them, and then Pickwick International would release the songs under like basically fictional band names. So it was just like a song factory, essentially. And one of the songs that Lou writes is this song called The Ostrich, which is a very like wry, mocking song that is kind of making fun of the popular dance craze songs of the era. And it has lyrics like, put your head on the floor and have somebody step on it. So it's very like tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic kind of song. And so Pickwick International releases The Ostrich, and they say that it's by a band called The Primitives, which is not a real band, it's a made-up band. But the song is actually a minor hit. And then the Primitives, the fictional band, gets asked to perform the song on TV. So Pickwick International has to like scramble around and like actually put together a band to sing the song. And so Lou is like suddenly fronting a band on television called The Primitives, which is very funny. By December of 1964, Edie has kind of established herself in New York City, and she meets Bob Dylan at a restaurant called Kettle of Fish in Greenwich Village in December of 1964. And Bob Dylan is smitten with Edie Sedgwick. He loves Edie, and they strike up, a little relationship. Of course, I have to stress, this was not Bob Dylan's only relationship that he was having at this time, but Edie doesn't really know that, and Edie is enamored with Bob Dylan. So a few weeks after Edie meets Bob Dylan at Kettle of Fish, she goes back to California for the holidays, and while she's home on New Year's Eve, Edie takes her father's car out for a joyride, and she takes along a friend, and they are speeding down the highway, and she runs a red light, and another car sideswipes her, and she crashes into a telephone pole, and her friend that's with her requires like 22 stitches, but Edie walks out of the car with almost no injuries. And there's a photograph of the car that is featured in the newspaper the next day, and the headline is, "How did two people step out of this car alive?" So it's like a very shocking accident. The really crazy thing is that at the same time that Edie is getting into her accident in California, her older brother Bobby, who is living in New York City, also decides to go for a New Year's Eve joyride, and he is speeding up 8th Avenue in New York City on his Harley Davidson motorcycle, and he crashes into the side of the bus, and he never regains consciousness, and 12 days later, Bobby passes away. So now this is the second brother that Edie has lost in a very dramatic fashion, really close together. But Edie doesn't really let this get her down. Maybe that's a bad way to put it. She doesn't really want to process this, and so she continues living her wild and crazy lifestyle back in New York once she gets back from her Christmas trip. January of 1965, Lou Reed and musician John Cale meet at the Pickwick International Studios. So they get along really well, and as they're getting to know each other, Lou Reed tells John Cale that when they recorded The Ostrich, all the guitars were tuned to one note. And John's ears perk up when he hears this because he has been experimenting with tuning guitars to just two notes. And so they realize that they kind of have like a similar interest in experimental music. And so John and Lou start jamming together. They also discover that they share a love of drugs and a hatred of like the folk music scene that was really popular in New York at the time. Like they were not about all that hippie shit, basically. And so they start to jam together, and they also start experimenting with drugs together. And John had done a lot of drugs already because he was kind of in the Lamont Young crew, which is someone that we discussed before, another experimental downtown underground art kind of person. And so John had done a lot of drugs with Lamont Young, but he had never injected anything. And so Lou introduces John to the wonders of heroin, and they start doing heroin together and jamming together. By February of 1965, Lou Reed and John Cale decide they should just live together, and so they move into an apartment on the Lower East Side, and they start doing like all these odd jobs for money. They sell their blood. They pose as like characters in these 15-cent tabloids that were really popular at the time. They had like no furniture, mattress on the floor. They would make like vegetable soup every day and survive off of that. Like they were living the starving artist lifestyle for sure. And by the spring of 1965, Lou Reed and John Cale are performing together on the street as musicians under the name The Falling Spikes. That is the name of their band. Meanwhile, back at the factory, by spring of 1965, the factory is well underway. So we have Edie Sedgwick has just moved to New York. She's new girl in town. She's hanging out with Bob Dylan at Kettle of Fish. She's an it girl kind of already. And then Lou Reed is living like practically this homeless drug addict lifestyle as a musician with John Cale, jamming, doing heroin. So that's kind of like the lay of the land. By 1965, the Mole People, which were the homeless drug addicts that lived at the factory, not to be confused with Lou Reed and John Cale, the Mole People had kind of taken over, and a trend had started to spread amongst the Mole People. And the trend was taking on a new name. It was kind of part of like becoming a superstar, was you have to pick your new name. You can't just be a regular person, a regular name. And so Billy Linick, who was formerly known as Billy Linick, he becomes Billy Name. And all of the Mole People start to take on these new names. And then on top of that, Andy starts a tradition of naming a Girl of the Year. In 1964, he dubbed the model Jane Holzer, who also went by the name Baby Jane Holzer. He dubbed her the 1964 Girl of the Year. And so this is kind of like the dawning of the superstar era. The idea that like you can take on a new identity and become this larger than life persona. And what also is very interesting about the concept of Girl of the Year is that it implies that you are disposable, because next year we will have a new Girl of the Year. And so it both like functions as this way to like name and identify superstars, and it also is this reminder of like you are disposable, you are replaceable, you will have a fall eventually. So that's already underway at the factory. By spring of 1965, Andy is ready to level up the films. He wants to make like a real movie. And so he buys the rights to A Clockwork Orange. This is actually the first film version of A Clockwork Orange. And it's a film by Andy Warhol that eventually will become known as vinyl. And so Ron Tavel, our playwright, has the task of taking A Clockwork Orange and turning it into a script that the Warhol superstars can film. So Ron does his job. He adapts A Clockwork Orange into a script. It's called Vinyl. And the factory sets out to create a real movie. And it is a disaster from the beginning. I mean, like, the superstars, they are not good at showing up on time or memorizing lines or following directions or anything like that. They very difficult to work with. And they had never been asked to learn lines before, really. Like, previously, Andy would just turn the camera on and you were supposed to be yourself, and whatever happened in front of the camera, that was the movie. That was it. This was actually an attempt to tell a story with a plot. So this was very much outside everyone's wheelhouse at the factory. At this point, although Gerard has actually appeared in more factory films than anyone else, he hasn't really had a chance to be a star because his real job is being Andy's assistant. In fact, Gerard was the only person at the factory who was getting paid. He was making minimum wage because he knew how to silk screen paintings. That is why he got hired. It was because he had an actual skill. And so Gerard had been diligently, loyally silk screening Andy's paintings, but he's around every day at the factory. And these days, in 1965, Andy's not as interested in the paintings as he is in the movies. And so Gerard is feeling kind of left out, and Andy decides that Gerard deserves to have a star turn. And so Andy says that Gerard can be the star of vinyl. And Gerard is thrilled. And Andy is kind of sadistic. And even though he tells Gerard that he's the star, he then goes on to sabotage Gerard. And every time they're about to have a rehearsal with Ron, Andy sends Gerard on an errand. And so Gerard struggles to learn his lines because Andy intentionally is making it difficult for Gerard to rehearse. Anytime a rehearsal starts, suddenly Andy has a job that he needs Gerard to do. So he tells Gerard that he can be the star of the film, but then intentionally sabotages him. So as this is happening, as they're getting ready to film Vinyl, Andy, in March of 1965, goes to a birthday party for Tennessee Williams, and he happens to meet Edie Sedgwick at this birthday party. And he is enamored immediately. And of course, Andy is always on the lookout for new superstars. And so he tells Edie that she's so beautiful, she has to come to the factory. She must be one of his 13 most beautiful girls. And so Edie starts hanging out at the factory, and almost immediately her and Andy are like that. They start hanging out together all the time. And Edie does not totally understand who Andy is or what he's doing or what the factory is or what's going on. But she likes the vibe, and her and Andy develop this very close, almost codependent relationship. And Edie cuts her hair really short and dyes it silver. And a lot of people think that she's doing that to kind of look like Andy's twin, because Andy would always wear these silver wigs. And she kind of starts dressing like Andy. They start dressing like each other, and they're just like two peas in a pod all the time. And then Andy throws one more thing at Gerard. Even though he told Gerard that he could be the star, now he wants Edie to be in Vinyl too. And so Gerard's upset because he's like, you said that I could be the star. And Andy's like, oh no, it's fine. Edie's just going to sit on this trunk. She's not going to have any lines. It's still your movie, Gerard. You're still the star. And so they film Vinyl, but Gerard, he doesn't come off that well because he couldn't memorize his lines because Andy sabotages him. And so his performance is kind of wooden and not that interesting. And Edie, even though she's just sitting on this trunk smoking a cigarette, she looks amazing. And when they film, when they screen Vinyl in front of audiences, all anybody can talk about is who is that girl? Who is Edie Sedgwick? So, in April of 1965, the factory hosts the most glamorous event that has yet to occur at the factory, and it is, of course, the 50 Most Beautiful People party. As you can probably guess, that is inspired by the 13 Most Beautiful Boys and the 13 Most Beautiful Girls. Now it is the 50 Most Beautiful People. And the event is kind of meant to be a crossover event between the like druggy downtown artistic mole people type scene and the celebrity wealthy upscale kind of class of people, because Andy was in touch with both of these crowds. He had access to high profile celebrities because of his work as a fine artist, because he was starting to get recognized for his artwork. And he also was obviously like very in touch with the downtown underground avant-garde art scene. I think now, in this day and age, it's kind of hard to understand how strange this was, because in American culture in 2025, we all have access to cameras and the internet, and anybody can be a celebrity, very much like the Andy Warhol ethos. But truly, we now all have phones, we all can make YouTube videos, there's no gatekeepers to media like there was in the 1960s. And upper class people and lower class people just didn't really mix. There was not an opportunity for wealthy people and homeless drug addicts to party together. And so this was like, on that level alone, this was a very new idea. And so this birthday party, or this party, the 50 Most Beautiful People party, was actually hosted by the film producer Lester Persky. And they invite Tennessee Williams, they invite Judy Garland, they invite all these like celebrities, but then also the mole people are there, the factory people are there. And as the party gets underway, well, actually, first of all, I've told this story in a number of videos, I think, but the factory was like, for all the drugs they were doing and all the heroin and all the amphetamines and all of that, they didn't really drink alcohol. Like that was fancy for them. And so even though like they have people shooting up all the time, having alcohol was like, okay, we're gonna have alcohol. And Billy sweetly was like very nervous about having alcohol at the party, and so he sets up this table with all the cocktails on it, and he's like trying to make it all nice for the celebrities. And the first person to arrive at the 50 Most Beautiful People party is Judy Garland. And she's cradled in the arms of the film producer Lester Persky and Tennessee Williams. They're like carrying her. The elevator opens, and these men walk in carrying Judy Garland. And it's meant to be like this grand entrance, but nobody's at the party yet. The only people in the room are Andy and Billy, like setting up the drink table, being all nervous about serving alcohol. And so they bring Judy in, and then they like look around, and she's really embarrassed because nobody's there. And so they just like put her down and kind of act like nothing happened. But that is kind of the vibe of the party. So as the party gets underway, everyone kind of starts looking around the room, and they realize that even though there are a lot of celebrities, like big celebrities at this party, all eyes are on the superstars. And it's this like transition moment where suddenly like the old celebrities were out and the superstars were in. Like Edie is the belle of the ball, not Judy Garland. And this is a seismic shift. This is like the ground has ruptured beneath our feet. Like this is so shocking and so new to everybody there. Like this has not happened before. Not long after this party, back on the Lower East Side, John Cale and Lou Reed, they are still jamming together, and they run into an old friend of Lou's named Sterling Morrison, and they reconnect, and Sterling starts jamming with John and Lou. So as those guys are jamming Lower East Side, doing whatever they can to get money, Edie has become the superstar at the factory. And over the summer, Andy and Edie film a series of films that basically depict depict a day in the life of Edie Sedgwick. And they are Restaurant, Poor Little Rich Girl, Afternoon, and Beauty Number 2. And these are documentary style films, and they're kind of meant to depict like a day in the life of a star. And so Poor Little Rich Girl shows Edie in the morning, Afternoon and Beauty Number 2 depict her later in the day, and then Restaurant depicts her at dinner. Meanwhile, I feel like everything that I say in this video is like, and then over here, and then over here. But somewhere else, a Miss Mary Warnove is an undergraduate at Cornell University. And Mary Warnove is experimenting at this time with something that she calls gender slipping. And she's like a beautiful girl, but she likes to dress in a more masculine way. And she starts going to bars and doing these like dances on small stages. And she kind of like dances in a more masculine way. And she says that it's way better for her to dance in front of a bunch of guys than to dance like up close and personal with just one dude. Like she gets a thrill out of like dancing in front of a large group of guys. She explained later, quote, "Why have just one when you could have 20? So as the factory is filming the Edie Sedgwick films, and Sterling and Lou and John Cale are jamming in the Lower East Side, and Mary Warnove is at Cornell dancing in bars in front of guys, Valerie Solanas has moved into the Chelsea Hotel, and she has brought her typewriter with her. Valerie, who is more or less homeless, occasionally homeless, she is very talented at writing, and she writes this searingly funny article, and it's called A Young Girl's Primer on How to Attain the Leisure Class. And she writes this while she's staying at the Chelsea Hotel. And the article is actually published in Cavalier magazine. Meanwhile, back at the factory. It's June 1965, and Ron Tavel, our poor playwright, has written a vehicle for Edie called Kitchen. And so they filmed Kitchen with Edie, and as they're filming it, Ron is inspired by the dripping of a faucet, and he gets this idea to write another film for Edie called Shower. And so Andy and Edie, they agree that Ron should write Shower, and so in a feverish 48 hours, Ron quickly writes the script for Shower. And after reading the script, Andy kind of murmurs that he doesn't really get it, and Edie says that this work is beneath Ron. And they both kind of insult Ron about the script for Shower. And Ron has had it. He has been trying so hard to write these scripts that these superstars never even follow. They don't memorize the lines. They don't follow the stage directions. They're not even using the scripts. And then Edie has the audacity to tell him that his script is bad. And that is he can't take it anymore. And so Ron leaves the factory in a rage, and he vows to avenge Shower. Before he can do that, Vogue profiles Edie. And they photograph Edie, and she's in her signature look. She has her long dangly earrings. She is wearing black tights and a leotard. She has her short hair, and she is dubbed a youth Quaker by Vogue magazine. And the whole article is about how these new young people are coming to New York and shaking things up. And Edie is a hit. She becomes even more, this is a national magazine. This is Vogue magazine. And so suddenly Edie is really famous, and it's based on just her image alone. It is not because she has done anything of note. Obviously she's been in Vinyl at the factory and some other films at the factory, but these are not films that are released in a national way. The only people that are seeing these films are the people in New York City who are going to these underground film screenings. So they've only been seen really by a handful of people, but nonetheless, now Edie is in Vogue, and now she's an international star, all of a sudden. So right after Edie has her Vogue magazine debut, Ron, who is still very upset about Shower, he decides that he is going to stage Shower at a small gallery in Soho. And he ropes his friend in. He ropes in a man named John Vaccaro. I apologize if I say that wrong. I feel like I always say that name wrong. But John has never directed anything in his life, and Ron is like, you can do it, you can direct this script, it's really simple, there's only one set, it takes place in a shower. And so they stage Shower at the Coda Galleries on Broome Street, and it's kind of a hit. And so John and Ron decide to start a theater company, and they name their theater company the Theater of the Ridiculous. I have talked about the Theater of the Ridiculous before, most notably in my Jackie Curtis video. So if you would like to learn more about that theater company, I highly encourage you to watch that video. Meanwhile, back on the Lower East Side, John Cale, Lou Reed, and Sterling Morrison make a debut tape, or a demo tape, sorry. And this demo tape includes the songs Heroin and I'm Waiting for the Man and Venus in Furs. And they send their demo tape out all over the city, and it is rejected everywhere that it is sent. As this is all happening, on July 20th, 1965, Bob Dylan releases the song Like a Rolling Stone. And this song is widely believed to be about Edie Sedgwick and the factory scene. And if you go listen to that song or even just read the lyrics, knowing now what you know about the factory, I think it will be very obvious that Bob Dylan was talking about Edie Sedgwick and the factory. And a lot of people think that Bob Dylan kind of like sensed danger looming, and this song was meant to be like a warning. In hindsight, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, Bob Dylan knew that disaster was lurking. Of course, at the time, like, I don't know if he knew disaster was lurking, but I'm sure he had a sense that this place was very crazy and filled with unstable people. So it is kind of like a natural assumption that one could make. But long story short, Bob Dylan he likes Edie. He does not like Andy Warhol. He does not like the factory. In October of 1965, Andy Warhol has his first retrospective showing at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia. And Edie Sedgwick and Henry Geldzahler go with him. Henry is somebody we had discussed in part 1 and 2. He's an art curator, and he's very good friends with Andy. And so the three of them go to Philadelphia to attend this retrospective, and they are mobbed. So many teenagers, young people show up to this art show that Andy and Edie and Henry have to climb a ladder and like get onto the roof basically. And they're the museum, wow. The gallery is so full of people that they have to take the art off the walls so that it doesn't get damaged. Really, all of these people are just here to see Andy and Edie. It's like they're the Beatles or something. Like, this has never happened. There's never been a reaction to an artist like this, ever, in America, at least. And so they're like, Edie and Andy and Henry are like stuck above the crowd. They like climb a ladder, and Edie has these long sleeves that are like silver and like drapey, and so she teases the crowd and she kind of vamps, and like she is soaking up all of the attention. And eventually the police have to come, and Henry and Edie and Andy have to climb onto the roof, and the police have to like escort them off the building and like have them jump to another building so they can get out, because there's just too many people and they would be mobbed. So this is really the first like tangible real world evidence that like something at the factory is like really hitting with the general public, and that the superstars are really becoming like legitimately famous. Then in the fall of 1965, Valerie Solanas is still living at the Chelsea Hotel, and she decides to turn the article she wrote, which is a young girl's primer for attaining the leisure class, she wants to turn it into a play. And so she starts working on her play, and she starts brainstorming different ideas for titles. And some of the titles that she thinks of are Up Your Ass, Up from the Slime, The Big Suck, and from cradle to boat. And so she's like experimenting with all of these titles and working on making this article into a play. Also in the fall of 1965, Lou is hanging out with his friend Tony, and they find this book on the street. It's a book about sadomasochism, and it's titled The Velvet Underground. And on the cover of the book, there's a photo of a whip and a black high-heeled boot and a mask. And Lou and John are fascinated by this book, and they decide to steal the name of the book for their band. And they decide to call their band The Velvet Underground. Also in the fall of 1965, Mary Warno and Gerard Malanga meet at a bus stop in Ithaca, New York. And I believe it was that Gerard had a friend that was going to the same college as Mary. And so Gerard was going to visit this friend. Mary's there going to school and performing in bars. And when they meet each other, it's just an immediate connection. And Mary notices that Gerard kind of flaunts a performative femininity in the same way that she flaunts a performative masculinity. They're both heterosexual, but they both kind of enjoy like experimenting with gender expression. And so Mary and Gerard really click at this initial meeting. But Mary's still at school. She is not in New York City yet. In November of 1965, the Velvet Underground has their first live performance at a high school dance, and they bring along a guy, this man named why can't I say that? Angus. Their friend Angus is the drummer. Wow, that was hard to say. So, the Velvet Underground debuts at a high school dance. The kids hate them. They like howl in outrage. When they play Heroin, they're like screaming for them to stop. Like they do not like this band. And after this high school dance, Angus is so discouraged by the reception that he quits the band, and he does not want to be the drummer anymore. And so they replace Angus with Mo Tucker, aka Maureen Tucker, who was the younger sister of one of Sterling's friends. And Mo had like no drumming experience, but she was like game to give it a try. And so she starts drumming with the Velvet Underground, and that's kind of it. From here on out, Sterling, Mo, John Cale, and Lou Reed are the Velvet Underground. In December of 1965, Mary Warno happens to come to the factory as part of a field trip. She was studying art at Cornell, and her class was taken on a trip to New York City to visit a bunch of different artist studios. And one of the studios they visit is the factory. And so her class is at the factory, and Mary sees Gerard, and Gerard recognizes Mary immediately. It's like, Mary, you gotta stay and sit for a screen test. You have to be one of the 13 most beautiful girls. And so when the class leaves, Mary hangs back and she stays at the factory. And she doesn't go back to school. Like now she's a factory person. They snatched her. In December of 1965, Bob Dylan visits the factory. He has continued to see Edie Sedgwick, and he comes to the factory somewhat begrudgingly. Actually, I think entirely begrudgingly. And the visit is an absolute disaster. Dylan keeps trying to put on his own music, which also is like, okay, really? But Dylan shows like open disdain for like the overtly queer atmosphere. He keeps trying to put on his own music, and Ondine keeps replacing it with opera. And he sits for a screen test, but he is like, man, if you watch that screen test, he does not look happy. He is having a very bad time. And Dylan like only stays for a little while, and then he's very clearly pissed off, and so he gets up to leave, and on his way out he steals one of the double Elvis paintings. So that visit did not go well. But right around the time of Dylan's visit, the Velvet Underground has made their way to the factory, and Andy, who loves having people around at all times and loves cool, different vibes, superstar-like people, he is thrilled to now have what is basically the house band. And so the factory's open pretty much 24 hours a day for anyone to come by, and so the band starts rehearsing at the factory instead of at the Lower East Side apartment. And it doesn't take long for Andy to realize that he has an asset on his hands here. And so Andy decides that he should manage the Velvet Underground. But he wants to make a few changes. He says that basically, like, the Velvet Underground is making a lot of ugly noise, and they collectively, like, they don't look that good. And so to counteract all of the ugliness, he's like, we gotta put a beauty with you. And Lou is not having it. He's like, no, we don't need a beauty. We're a band. We play good music. What are you talking about? And Andy's like, no. Believe me. For you to be successful, we need to add a beauty. And so he decides to add Nico, a model who had just started hanging out at the factory, to the Velvet Underground lineup. And if you've ever seen or listened to the Velvet Underground and Nico, you may have noticed that the record is titled The Velvet Underground and Nico. And that is because that was kind of the compromise they made, was that Lou would only accept Nico performing with them if it was made very clear that Nico was not in the band. And so it's the Velvet Underground and Nico. They perform together, but they're not together. So that is why that is the title. And so Nico joins the Velvet Underground, although she's not in the band, but she is kind of in the band. And so they start practicing together, and Andy gets this new situation, a show. And the first big show that Andy gets him is a psychiatrist banquet. It is a banquet for all the very well-to-do psychiatrists of New York City. And Andy is hired to provide entertainment. And so he brings the Velvet Underground along and Nico, and he also brings Billy Name to do the lights, and then Gerard comes to like do a dance with a whip in front of the band, and Edie actually comes to dance as well. And what's very interesting about this psychiatrist banquet show is that it's kind of Edie's last performance, and it's also Nico's first performance. And so even though it was not planned this way, there is this symbolic like passing of the baton, where as Nico is making her debut, Edie is saying goodbye to the factory scene, although they do not know it yet. And so they perform at this psychiatrist banquet. It goes terribly. People really do not understand the Velvet Underground music. It sounds like noise. They're singing about doing drugs. The psychiatrists like cannot handle it. They don't know what to do with themselves. It's like, it's atonal. It's just, to their ears, it sounds like a mess. And so they are very upset. And Andy Warhol kind of like demurs from taking responsibility. And he's like, oh, sorry, I have like an earache, so I can't really hear or see. That is what he said. And so the event, from the psychiatrist's perspective, the event is a failure. From Andy's perspective, this is a hit. He is very excited about the Velvet Underground and the possibilities. And so they leave the psychiatrist banquet, and Andy is thrilled. And the Velvet Underground is kind of thrilled because they like pissing people off, especially Lou. So in their eyes, the event was a success. As the year 1965 draws to a close, Edie is very suspicious that Andy is making fun of her, that all of the films that she was in were actually meant to mock her. And so she starts to confront Andy about this, and Andy's like, no, what are you talking about? And she also was like, well, you never paid me. What are you doing? Like, why are you making these films? And they get in this big fight, and Edie tells Andy that Bob Dylan actually cares about her, and Bob Dylan is going to take her to Hollywood, and she's going to be in a real movie, and she doesn't need Andy Warhol anymore. And Andy is very hurt by this, and they kind of break up. And Edie comes to the factory like a few more times in 1966, but really like by the end of 1965, their relationship is over. And so the whole Edie Sedgwick era, it's just a few months. It's really spring of 1965 until December 1965, like 6 months essentially. And that's it. That's the whole Edie Sedgwick's story in terms of the factory. But it makes such an impact on the culture. And because Edie becomes famous for real and has this Vogue magazine feature, word spreads in a national way that if you come to Andy Warhol's studio in Manhattan and you show up, he might put you in a movie and you might become famous. And this idea is now out in the world. And so people, not just in New York, but all over the world now know that there is this mecca. If you want fame, there is a place you can go to get it. So we are going to leave things there for this video. In the next video, we will have our final conclusion of the factory story, although I, of course, plan to make many more videos about Andy because we have not gotten to the 70s. We have not gotten to Studio 54. There's a lot more to talk about. But for the factory series, the 4-part factory series, we will conclude next week with the shocking conclusion, the attempted murder of Andy Warhol. So tune in. And when I say next week, I mean, I'm really going to try and make it by next week. I really, really am. I really am. But if you have made it this far, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Like the video, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!